Michael Jackson did not fall because of the glare of the spotlight, but because of a rumor so persistent, it eroded his spirit for decades. In a rare, exclusive conversation, Janet Jackson sat across from me, silent for a moment, before deciding to finally break years of quiet, revealing the secret she herself calls the shadow that followed my brother until his very last day. It was a secret inflamed by mysterious symbols, by half-joking, half-serious remarks from the public, by speculative interpretations that pushed Michael into a vortex of misunderstanding until his final breath. And today, with Janet choosing to speak at last, the truth, or the closest thing to it, finally comes to light. Before we enter this unsettling story, don't forget to like and subscribe to continue following the journey into the mystery that has sent chills through the world. No one can forget the moment Michael Jackson, the most scrutinized artist of the 80s and 90s, entered the phase in which every symbol, every smallest detail surrounding him became an object of overinterpretation by the public. When I mentioned this during our private conversation, Janet Jackson nodded, paused for a long beat as if rewinding time. She said this was the period marking the greatest turning point in her brother's artistic life, the moment when fans, the media, and even outsiders simultaneously examined every detail, costumes, props, stage symbols, and turned them into endless questions. Michael did not say much, and his silence only intensified speculation, transforming the symbols around him into fertile ground for countless interpretations. Janet explained that the visual symbols Michael used were never truly mysterious, if viewed through the proper artistic lens. A fusion of geometry, elements of pop culture iconography, and strong theatrical aesthetics that had long defined his style. But at that time, when Michael introduced new ideas, sometimes a small detail, sometimes an entire stage design, the public did not see them as pure creative choices. They began to assign deeper meaning to everything, convinced that each detail must carry a hidden layer. Janet said she often felt both amused and saddened. The audience loved him so much and was so curious that they looked at any curve, symbol, or movement and built entire stories around it. According to Janet, Michael never gave any specific explanation. He simply said that art must be free. He wanted people to see what he chose to present, but he refused to be forced to define the meaning behind every creative decision. This is a well-documented fact. His staging choices were meant to optimize artistic expression, not to convey mysteries or fuel any occult narrative. But, as Janet sighed, people always prefer complicated stories over simple truths. When a genius operates outside the norm, audiences rarely accept an ordinary explanation. Janet recounted that even in some performances, where Michael appeared relaxed, communicated normally, and composed regularly, the public kept scrutinizing the symbols on his costumes, props, and stage designs as though they were coded messages. These visuals were attached to everything related to him: albums, concert stages, even backstage photographs. This led even the most rational observers to admit that, although there was nothing supernatural behind them, the abstraction in Michael's creative work had an undeniable pull that made people want to decode it. During that period, the symbols surrounding Michael ceased to be mere elements of stagecraft. They became the spirit of his public image, an image that the audience themselves constructed through imagination. The media at the time did not know how to name this phenomenon. Janet recalled that some journalists even invented expressions never used before, as if conventional language was not enough to capture Michael's creative depth. Ironically, this added even more ambiguity. An artist everyone knew, yet no one truly understood. A legend with countless symbolic visuals that no one could definitively interpret. Each time he appeared, the symbols again became the focal point. Some saw them as the merging of cultural opposites. Some viewed them as artistic declarations. Others believed Michael was simply testing how far the public would go in their attempts to interpret him. For loyal fans, these choices were bold, artistic steps. For those who craved drama, they were fuel for new narratives. And for those inclined to mystify everything, they became foundations for theories that went far beyond reality. Nevertheless, Michael remained silent. No denial, no confirmation, no explanation. Janet said this silence allowed the symbols and the rumors to grow with time. He let speculation form and evolve naturally, as though he understood that the less he spoke, the more space art had to breathe. The symbols thus became extensions of his personality, deep, perfectionist, unwilling to be confined by definitions, and sometimes silent, to the point that people wondered what he was truly thinking. Janet remembers vividly the moment Michael stepped into this artistic phase. The world stood before a newly opened door without seeing what lay inside. What lay within was not a frightening darkness, but a hazy space without clear explanation, a place where people could project their own thoughts. Michael stepped in first, guiding with his style, leaving behind years of awe and bewilderment. And for that reason, Janet explained, the symbols associated with Michael eventually became part of his legend. Even though the truth was simply bold artistic choices and occasional experimentation, many still insisted he was hiding something deeper. They looked at the elegance, the mystery, the fluidity of his artistic details, and crafted their own stories. Some thought they were messages. Some believed they signaled a rebirth in his art. Although all of these were merely interpretations, the symbols remained at the center of public discussion. And so, with artistic choices alone, Michael drew the entire world into a decoding game. People watched him, listened to him, followed his every movement, but could not figure out what he truly meant. In that ambiguity, the name Michael Jackson did not disappear, but the myth surrounding him grew more profound. The symbols emerged as assertions that Michael was not just a person. He was an idea, a current of creativity, a force that no boundary could contain. And from that moment, the mystery around Michael and around his artistic symbolism opened the first chapter of a journey that no one could ever fully decipher. Whispers began to slip through the rows of audience seats, through backstage conversations, across the early music forums of the internet, and even into bars where people who hardly cared about pop music still found themselves mentioning the name Michael Jackson. When I brought this up, Janet Jackson let out a quiet sigh and said that all those murmurs revolved around a question that sounded like a joke at first, yet somehow became the center of a whirlwind of speculation. Did Michael achieve his extraordinary talent through some kind of agreement beyond human understanding? In the beginning, Janet recalled clearly, these were just offhand remarks from spectators who simply could not believe that one person could sing, dance, and create at such an almost supernatural level. Comments like, "No one can move like that without something special behind it," or His music sounds like it comes from another world. And then somewhere along the way, a metaphorical line Michael once said about his absolute devotion to art, "I gave my life to my music," was gradually distorted with each retelling. In an instant, that figurative statement was turned into a confession. A confession that had never appeared in any interview, any broadcast, any recording, yet spread as though people had heard Michael say it with their own ears. And then, as if every coincidence had been arranged in advance, the appearance of symbolic, heavily stylized stage elements in Michael's tours, from mysterious motifs, geometric stage constructions, to intricate props, led part of the audience to believe that these were more than mere artistic choices. They looked at the unusual curves, the symmetrically engineered lighting, and whispered that everything felt too mysterious, too otherworldly, too reminiscent of some ancient mark. All of it was speculation, but over time, those speculations solidified into full-fledged stories, complete with beginnings and endings, despite having no verifiable basis whatsoever. Many people began comparing Michael to musical legends whose brilliance seemed too extraordinary to be considered normal. Janet noted how strange it felt to watch the public rely on the same pattern to explain every genius. When they cannot comprehend excellence, they attach supernatural stories to the artist. Michael, with his ability to sing, dance, direct stages, compose, and produce at a level no one could match, became the perfect target for that kind of reasoning. What Janet emphasized as most important was this: Michael never said anything that could reinforce such stories. On the contrary, he consistently expressed a deep belief in creativity, in pure artistry, and in decades of relentless practice. But silence, according to Janet, is sometimes the most fertile ground for imagination. Michael neither denied nor confirmed anything. He stayed silent because he did not want distractions unrelated to his music. And that very silence allowed rumors to grow, branching off into countless versions. Some people claimed Michael became a genius overnight, and therefore there must have been something unnatural involved. But the truth, which Janet stressed, is that Michael began training when he was 4 or 5 years old, dedicating thousands of hours to mastering every skill, from singing and dancing to creating choreography and composing. Yet for those who craved drama, that truth felt too ordinary. They wanted a bigger story, a stranger story, a shocking story, something that could explain the impossibility they perceived when witnessing his talent. Rumors grew even stronger when Michael shifted his image, experimenting with bold visual styles, gender-fluid costumes, and deeply theatrical performances. Those accustomed to seeing the world through fixed templates could not comprehend that boldness, and instead of analyzing the art, they chose to explain it through tales tinged with mysticism. Others watched how Michael commanded a stage, absorbing the entire room's energy, performing as though his body operated on an inexhaustible power, and concluded it all couldn't be human. Yet in reality, Janet explained, this was simply the peak of performance mastery, a flawless fusion of breath, movement, and music. But for those who sought secrets, emotion became evidence. And so the rumors spread. No one knew where the story began. No one remembered who said it first. But everything blended together, forming a thin veil that hung over Michael Jackson's name. Every time he stepped onto a stage, under the lights and roaring cheers, there were always a few who looked at him not only with admiration, but with a curiosity mixed with fear. as if they believed something unnamed lurked behind the brilliance. Then, when Michael passed away in 2009, that fateful day ignited every story that had once lingered in the shadows. Fans mourned deeply, but others dug up old rumors and attached them to his passing, as though everything were connected. They said he paid a price. They said his legacy carried the mark of a pact. These claims were born only from emotion, ignorance, and guided imagination. Yet the rumors spread, especially when repeated by those who preferred sensational tales to the truth. Janet looked straight at me and said clearly, "The most important thing, and the absolute truth, is that there is no evidence, not even the smallest trace, that Michael ever believed in, engaged in, or mentioned any kind of supernatural agreement. All of it was rumor, uncorroborated fragments created by the public to explain a level of talent they could not comprehend. And in the world of legends, sometimes it is these untrue rumors that shape the aura of mystery surrounding an artist. And Michael, a man already enigmatic, became even more elusive as those whispers continued to spread, like a wind that never stops blowing across his legacy." On June 25, 2009, the music world seemed to fall silent for a few seconds when the first reports about Michael Jackson appeared. No one knew what had truly happened. The initial news was vague and fragmented, as if no one dared to write what they feared most. An ambulance, an emergency call, a man found unresponsive in the Holmby Hills home where Michael had lived, created, and sheltered his artistic universe for years. No one imagined that the place that once served as the heartbeat of a legend would become the stage for an unforeseen tragedy. The news spread like a storm. Fans gathered outside Michael's home, carrying flowers, candles, and signs. Anyone who had ever seen him perform, heard his voice, or felt the almost unbelievable energy in his music sensed an emptiness opening up. An emptiness that swallowed America and then the world. To many, Michael was more than an artist. He was a symbol of aspiration, innovation, difference, and absolute creative freedom. His sudden departure only tightened the pain. In that moment, the public wanted an explanation. They needed to know what had happened, how someone who seemed immortal on stage could leave without warning. And when the official cause was announced, an accidental overdose from prescribed medication, many still could not accept it. To them, the truth felt too plain, too ordinary, too distant from the mythical image they had long associated with Michael. So speculation erupted, fast and fierce, louder than the screams of the crowds at his concerts. Some said he had been exhausted for years due to overwork. Some said he had sunk into deep loneliness. No one understood. Others recalled that in his final days, Michael seemed more reflective, as if holding something he could not articulate. These stories existed, but no one knew what was true, what was perception, and what was imagination. And then, Janet said, in the middle of that grief-stricken atmosphere, old rumors about deals, secrets, and strange symbols in Michael's art resurfaced. For those who had believed such ideas from the beginning, Michael's passing became evidence to stitch their theories together. They said it couldn't be a coincidence that he died at that moment. They whispered that his life had always been filled with signs, and his death was simply the final chapter of a larger story. All of it, of course, was rumor. No proof, no confirmation, only the imagination of people overwhelmed by loss. Janet said no one created these stories out of malice. They simply could not accept that a genius like him could leave the world in such a human way. They wanted a reason that was bigger, deeper, more tragic. Not only did old rumors return, new theories began to surface, even stranger than before. Some said Michael sensed something was coming, that his final rehearsals carried an unusual melancholy. Others claimed he became quiet, like someone carrying a secret. Some articles described his appearance in those final weeks: thinner, eyes deeper, as if weighed down by thoughts. But all such portrayals were subjective. No one could say they reflected the truth. The only truth, Janet said, was that Michael had long struggled with chronic pain from years of performing. He used medication to manage it, and over time, that made his body more vulnerable. This reality belonged entirely to human life. It had nothing to do with the supernatural. No mysterious symbols, no deals. But in the emotional storm of the day he died, that ordinary truth was drowned out by the dark echoes of imagination. As more people gathered outside UCLA Medical Center, the atmosphere grew almost mystical. Hundreds of candles were lit, their flames reflecting off tear-streaked faces. Many played Michael's songs, letting Man in the Mirror or Heal the World echo through the crowd. Others stood in silence for hours, as if waiting for something. And in the haze of grief, the images and symbols associated with Michael, once mere artistic expressions, became anchors for speculation. To many, the family's silence in the first days only thickened the air. Not because they were hiding anything, but because they were devastated. Yet for an audience caught in emotional turbulence, that silence became a void into which countless theories poured. It was a strange moment. Caught between painful reality and chaotic rumor, Michael, though gone, remained an unfinished mystery, as if his passing carried its own shroud of unanswered questions. But despite all the rumors, one thing never changed. Michael's legacy belongs to music, to art, to boundless creativity. The vague stories were just passing smoke. The truth, simple, painful, unexpected, remains for those willing to face it. Michael died because of human circumstances, not forces beyond control. And even as rumors tangled with truth on the day he left, that moment became one of the most ambiguous and dramatic chapters in pop culture history. A final curtain both tragic and mysterious, unintentionally echoing the entire artistic journey of Michael Jackson. In the bleak days following Michael Jackson's passing, the entire world seemed to wait for one person, Janet Jackson, his sister, the closest family member remaining, and the one who understood most deeply the pain, pressure, and immense artistic legacy he left behind. Every gaze was fixed on her, as though her silence were the key to unlocking the mystery millions were trying to decipher. But what confused everyone most was this: Janet chose silence. Her silence didn't come from not knowing what to say, nor from attempting to hide something. In the moment of losing the brother who had been by her side her entire life, silence was simply the natural language of grief. But to a public caught in the middle of an emotional storm, desperately searching for answers and craving confirmation for every rumor spreading wildly, that silence became strangely suspicious. Sometimes the truest emotions are the ones most easily distorted. Janet did not appear before the press immediately. She did not step in front of dozens of cameras to read a statement, nor did she share anything about Michael's final days. People only saw her walking through the hospital grounds and later outside the family home. her face quiet, her eyes red, as if her entire world were collapsing inside her. She embraced relatives, held Michael's team members, and barely said a word. Yet in that fragile moment, silence became fertile ground for imagination. On online forums, the same question echoed repeatedly. Why isn't Janet saying anything? The calm voices said she was mourning. But others, those drawn to drama, didn't stop there. They began spinning baseless theories. Some claimed Janet was silent because she couldn't accept reality. Others insisted she knew more than what had been released publicly. Some even tied her silence to the vague rumors that had surrounded Michael for years, that he carried some hidden truth, that his death was connected to mystical symbols in his art. All of it was speculation, no evidence, no verification. In truth, as I observed, and as Janet told me in our private conversation, she had always been a reserved person. Even when Michael was alive, the two rarely shared personal matters publicly. They grew up in a family overflowing with music, but also taught to protect their private world, not to let emotions become fodder for the media. Michael kept to himself. So did Janet. Her silence in those early days was entirely natural, only the public was unaccustomed to it. As every minute passed without a word from Janet, the atmosphere grew heavier. Journalists waited outside the Jackson home, trying to capture her smallest gestures, as if a brief turn of her head or a moment of hesitation could be interpreted into meaning. Amid the noise, she merely lowered her gaze and walked past the crowd, quiet, gentle, yet somehow fueling even more curiosity. Then something strange happened. Janet's silence unintentionally became a mist that enveloped every story about Michael. Instead of quelling rumors, it made them grow. Not because Janet did anything wrong, but because the public needed answers. And when the only person who might speak remained silent, that hunger turned into speculation. Analytical posts flooded the internet. People studied Janet's expressions in the few moments captured by cameras. Some said her eyes held something unsaid. Others believed she was holding back tears. And still others insisted her silence signaled a hidden truth. All of it was personal interpretation, nothing more. The truth was far simpler. Janet had lost her brother, and the pain was too immense to be articulated. At that moment, she was not a spokesperson, not a decoder, not a storyteller. She was simply a grieving sister. But the public did not see Janet as someone mourning. They saw her as the guardian of every story surrounding Michael, his art, his fame, and the endless, unverified rumors. And that created a paradox. What Janet needed most was quiet to protect the final memories of her brother. Yet that very quietness was interpreted in the opposite direction. Some fans defended her, saying Michael had been private all his life, and Janet was merely honoring that legacy. Others believed certain things between siblings didn't need to be spoken to the world. But these voices were far softer than the wave of speculation sweeping through media and online spaces. Those who thrived on drama continued digging deeper, claiming Michael had confided in Janet, that she was avoiding a greater truth, that silence itself was proof of a secret. These were empty theories, rooted in nothing. And in those long stretches of quiet, Janet, unintentionally, was positioned as the final gatekeeper of the Michael Jackson legend. Not because she wanted the role, but because the public placed it upon her. They believed that if Janet said a single sentence, many rumors would cease. But she continued to choose silence, the silence of someone trying to protect the last bit of peace for herself and for her brother's memory. Finally, when Janet did appear at a brief press gathering, she spoke only a few simple words: that she was heartbroken, that she loved her brother, and that she hoped people would respect their family's privacy. She did not address rumors. She did not hint at secrets. She offered nothing sensational, only the most genuine truth. Yet that sincerity did not extinguish the rumors. For some, her words were too simple to satisfy their hunger for drama. Silence, though born from real grief, was used as fuel to keep the stories alive. That day, as Janet left the press conference, she did not look back at the crowd. Her face was somber, her eyes still swollen, but her shoulders straight. She said nothing more. And that silence, tender, painful, resolute, closed a door before the world's eyes. A door whose echo continued to linger, leaving countless questions unanswered. As if the story of Michael Jackson had never truly ended, and Janet's silence only made the mystery feel deeper, thicker, and further out of reach than ever before. After the last tears had dried, after the candles outside UCLA Medical Center had burned out, and after the final media van rolled away from Holmby Hills, one thing remained untouched: the legacy of Michael Jackson. A legacy not confined to music alone, but woven into the very fog of ambiguity that had always surrounded his life. As the world moved through the first month, then several months after his passing, people began to realize that what Michael left behind was not merely art, but a strange blend of blinding brilliance and lingering shadows. Janet told me she had never seen an artist remembered in such a divided way. One part of the public holds on to Michael as a pure musical genius, a man who could arrange an entire album, compose songs that were unmistakably his within seconds, and perform with an energy that seemed to defy human limits. To them, Michael is the embodiment of boundless creativity, the symbol of an artist who refused to conform. But the other part, even without meaning to, continues to keep Michael wrapped in a haze of speculation. The stories about cryptic stage symbols, about metaphors twisted into something else, about unexplainable phases in his career. All of it resurfaces, dissected and reinterpreted from endless angles. The farther away the world moves from the day he died, the louder those stories seem to grow, as though people are unwilling to let Michael pass into history without attaching a mystery to his name. The paradox, Janet said, is painfully simple. Everyone knows these are just rumors, yet they keep retelling them. Not out of malice, but because humans are irresistibly drawn to the parts of a legend that remain unlit. And Michael, reserved, private, elusive, became the perfect landscape for such stories to flourish. At music conferences, experts analyze his choreography, his innate compositional instincts, the almost obsessive precision of his rhythms. But minutes later, at the coffee tables outside those same panels, conversations drift back to the rumors. They speak of how Michael would appear like a flash of electricity on stage and vanish into the wings as if he'd never existed. They talk about his dramatic image reinventions, the symbols placed on stage, the artistic choices that blurred the line between performance and myth. And often those discussions fold into theories built on nothing but conjecture. This, Janet observed, is what created a two-sided legacy. On one side, Michael, the genius born of light. On the other, Michael, the legend suspended in narratives no one can verify. No one set out to create this division. It simply formed on its own, as though Michael's legacy were destined to exist between two opposing extremes. But when one looks at what truly remains, she said, all doubt dissolves. Because in Michael's archives, the unreleased tapes, the demos heard only by a select few, the raw acoustic recordings, stripped of spectacle, yet devastating in their beauty, everything points to a simple truth. Michael never needed a single rumor to become a legend. He became one through work, talent, and an unwavering devotion to his craft. And for anyone who ever doubted it, all it takes is one listen to even his simplest recordings to understand. Michael did not receive his gift. He built it himself. From his brightest days to his final moments, Michael Jackson always walked a line between light and shadow, not because he intended to manufacture a legend, but because his life itself was a journey no one could ever fully decipher. When I mentioned this, Janet Jackson paused for a long beat before saying that the rumors, the silences, and the misinterpreted symbols around him had only amplified the magnetism of an artist born to be different. Yet after all the noise, what remains is the music, the one thing no one can question, the one thing that outlives every whisper. Janet told me that if there is anything she regrets most, it is that too many people remember Michael through the haze of speculation, while the only thing he truly left the world, clear, undeniable, and more real than any myth, was his music. And if this story resonates with you, she hopes you'll keep listening, keep reflecting, and follow the journeys ahead to understand the parts of his legacy that have never been fully revealed, the parts that still live in the hearts of millions.